but I am Terry Phoenix. I'm the director of the LGBTQ Center. My pronouns are T or he, him, his. And I want to welcome everybody to the second session of the 2020 Queer MiniCon, which was a brainchild of the LGBTQ Center ambassadors and has been brought to life by the staff of the LGBTQ Center, most notably April Callis and Mariel Eves and our work study students. They've been working really hard to bring this to you. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker tonight is Dr. Antonia Randolph from the Department of American Studies here at UNC-Chapel Hill. Dr. Randolph uses the pronouns she, her, hers, and is a cultural sociologist whose interests include diversity discourse in education, multicultural capital, non-normative Black masculinity, and the production of misogyny in hip-hop culture. She's a member of the Scholars Network on Masculinity and the Well-Being of African American Men and a participant in the Women of Color Leadership Project of the National Women's Studies Association. Her first book, The Wrong Kind of Different, Challenging the Meaning of Diversity in American Classrooms, examined the hierarchies elementary school teachers constructed among students of color. She has also published in the Sociology of Race and Ethnicity, the Journal of Contemporary Ethnography, the Feminist Wire, and Scalawag magazine. Her current book project, That's My Heart, Queering Intimacy in Hip Hop Culture, examines portrayals of Black men's intimate relationships in hip hop culture. So thank you again very much for being here with us tonight, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be at this. Is this the first Queer MiniCon? Is this the first one? Yes. I'm so excited to be in the inaugural Queer MiniCon, hopefully the first of many. And I wanted to share with you all today some work I've been doing that is the basis of my next book. As Terry said, the next book is called That's My Heart, Queering Intimacy in Hip Hop Culture. And I wanted to share with you all some of the thinking I've been doing about some of the limitations of how queer theory, sexuality studies has thought about sexual orientation and what studying hip hop could contribute to our understandings of sexual orientation. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Thumbs up if you can see this? Thumbs up if you can see it? Okay. So the title of my talk today was Wayne Loves Baby, Queering Intimacy in Hip Hop Culture. And I like to start off with this image, as this is a scene from the Golden Globes in 2017, and it's a picture of two of the actors in the TV show Atlanta. Thumbs up if you watched the TV show Atlanta. Thumbs up if you watched the TV show Atlanta. It's on hiatus right now, I believe. And the premise of the TV show is it's about three Black men in Atlanta trying to make it in the hip hop music industry. But what I thought was interesting about this image, and so the TV show is about three Black men trying to make it in the music industry, but this is a scene from the Golden Globes where Donald Glover, the creator of the TV show Atlanta, and one of the stars of the show, of the TV show, he got a Golden Globe award. And these are two of the actors who are also on Atlanta. They were in the audience, and this is how they responded to him getting the Golden Globe. And I thought this image was striking for the sort of tenderness between two Black men that we don't typically associate with hip hop culture or with Black masculinity. The way that Keith Stanfield, who plays the character Darius on the TV show, is leaned into the body of Brian Tyree Henry. It's a sign of an affection. It's showing that they don't lack a fear of physical touch to show how close they are. They're both teared up. And so they're in the TV show, Paperboy and Darius these two men who are the characters on the TV show, they have what I call a platonic couple, which is the subject of my talk today. They are a platonic couple, a dyad of close friends whose kind of closeness rivals the closeness we think of as romantic couples having. But what I think is interesting here is even off the TV show, these men are modeling a sort of intimate closeness, an openness towards showing tenderness that is not typical of what we think about is happening in hip hop culture. So today's talk thinks through dyadic friendships, close dyadic friendships between men and hip hop culture, platonic couples, as a kind of challenge to what we think about when we think about sexual orientation, when we think about how sexuality is gendered. So here's our interactive portion. What is going on in this picture? You can put it in the chat. You can put your response in the chat. What is going on in this picture? Two lovers engaged in PDA, a father kissing his son, two rappers staging a publicity stunt, mob members greeting each other. What is going on in this picture? And you can put your answer in the chat. So what's going on in this picture and how do you know? Let's see. Again, some answers. A, B. The handhold. B. B. So what do we have? We have actually a lot of A, some B. Let's see. Don't know what's going on, but somebody's not enjoying it. A, B, and C, Kita. Oh my God, they can't be all the answers. All. The look of disgust on the right is interesting. Okay, so thank you all who participated in trying to interpret this interaction. Okay, the handshake seems bro-ish. So we're trying to unpack what kind of intimacy this is, right? What sort of closeness this is. And it seems like the overwhelming response is that it's two lovers engaged in PDA or a public display of affection. That seemed to be the dominant response today. Does anyone know who these two people are? You can put that in chat too. Does anyone know who these two people are? Anyone know who these two people are? You can put it in the chat if you know who these folks are. No one knows who these two people are? Lil Wayne, thank you, Marielle. Lil Wayne and Baby. So some of you might have heard of Lil Wayne, the rapper from New Orleans, and then Baby or Birdman, his producer and rapper and erstwhile father figure. And so this was an image circulated on the internet in 2006 of Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne is on your left and Baby on your right. I'm sharing a kiss. So this picture was circulated on the internet in 2006, and this kind of launched this research that I'm doing for my book. So they're both in the rap industry and they're kissing on the lips. And what I was fascinated by was how people who are in the rap community, hip hop fans, responded to the kiss. And what I found in at part of the study that studied gossip blogs and how they talked about the kiss, the second most common response, so the first most common response about what kind of intimacy this is, the first most common response was that it was two lovers engaged in PDA, which is to say that they're gay. And I would say what I want to present to you all today is that there is a tendency to see men who show physical affection to each other, to read that as sexual orientation, to read that as a sign of sexual desire. And so the dominant response by rap fans when they saw this image was that these are two men engaged in PDA, that these are two gay men. But the second most dominant response, 35% of people on gossip blogs across the internet said that this was a sign of friendship. And what I'm wanting to think about today is how do we define intimacy? How do you know that intimacy involves sexual desire? And what does it have to do with our notions of gender? And what I want to suggest to you all is that we collapse, when we think about sexuality, we collapse all kinds of intimacy into sexual desire. That we collapse emotional closeness, physical closeness, various ranges of ways that people can be close to each other into a sign of sexual desire and a sign of sexual orientation. But unexpectedly, within hip-hop culture has evolved to create a space for a closeness between men that would challenge our typical categorization of sexual orientation. So this is a quote from the Gossip blog that my colleagues and I studied. They may not be gay at all. Broaden your minds. They've been through a lot together. They may just be that close. And so where we might typically understand a kiss on the lips between two men in particular, and the men part is important, we read closeness between men differently than we read closeness between women. So a kiss shared on the lips by two women, women can do that, and the assumption that two women are straight is still preserved. Contrastingly, when men show affection that's physical, especially kissing on the lips, they get recategorized as gay. But here's hip hop culture saying, no, that's not necessarily true. Two men kissing on the lips doesn't mean that they're gay. They may just be that close. So how do we understand sexual orientation? What do we use as the basis to understand sexual orientation? Particularly since queer theory has been overwhelmingly interested in the gay straight binary. But we can ask a prior question, how do we define sexual orientation in the first place? What do we take as signs of sexual orientation? Are there better ways to categorize closeness between people and separate that from desire? So the literature on sexual orientation has a place for the kind of friendship that I'm ascribing to Paperboy and Darius, to Lil Wayne and Baby. They would talk about it as passionate friendships. And what I was getting at earlier is that these kind of close dyadic bonds between people of the same sex, where there is an intimacy, a physical closeness, a sense of confiding in each other that would rival romantic relationships, those sort of passionate friendships are read differently depending on who's involved. And so this is Lisa Diamond's work, where she would say, historically and contemporarily, women can have passionate friendships and still be seen as straight. But when men are having passionate friendships, when they show physical affection to each other, they tend to be seen as gay. So there's a gendering of sexualities, that women's behaviors are read differently than men's behavior when they're showing intimacy. But what I want to suggest is that this ascription to sexual orientation may be the wrong move to make. And so critical sexuality studies scholars have argued that emotional attachment is separable from sexual orientation. That is to say, you could be in a homo-nurturant relationship where your emotional attachments, your closeness, the person you turn to for comfort is someone of the same sex, but your sexual desire, the person you're sexually active with can be someone of the opposite sex. Homo-nurturant and hetero-nurturant are separable. Your emotional attachment is separable from your sexual orientation. But there's a way that queer theory erases all those variations and people's forms of intimacy and collapses everything into sexual desire, as though emotional attachment lines up with sexual behavior, lines up with sexual identity. But I'm suggesting that that's separable, and we know that in particular by looking at hip hop. So Wayne and Baby, I would say, are performing homo-nurturance, even though their sexual orientation, based on their own accounting of it, is heterosexual. Other research shows that while in earlier time periods, there was a prohibition between straight men showing physical affection to each other, lest they be seen as gay, there's a decline in homohysteria. Homohysteria defined as the fear of being seen as gay. There's a decline in homohysteria that allows white men, in this case, white middle-class men, to show physical affection to their friends because they're no longer afraid of being seen as gay. What I'm asking with this research is that here we have in hip hop culture a space being carved out for passionate friendships between men, for emotional attachment that's homo-nurturing, does it follow the same pathways as the decline of homohysteria that people are finding among white men? Can we account for the closeness between men and hip hop in the same way that people are accounting for the closeness between men among white middle class people? What about Black men? So much of queer theory is centered on the experience of white middle class people. So much is centered on the experience of the West. This is where queer culture critique comes out, Roderick Ferguson's work. And so what I'm suggesting with this work on hip hop, that there is a closeness between men that has to do with emotional attachment, which is separable from sexual orientation, that may not have the same pathway that we can use to account for closeness between white middle class men. There are whole other worlds of sexual orientation, emotional attachment, intimacy that isn't well accounted for by traditional queer theory that centers the experiences and the ideas of white middle class people. So I'm studying hip hop because I'm interested in how can we account for the rise of passionate friendships in hip hop culture by being attuned to the social and cultural forces that shapes the predominant forms of intimacy in any given time. There can be different competing forms of norms of intimacy in different time periods that's shaped by social stressors. So hip hop emerged in the 1980s in the era of mass incarceration, in the era of welfare reform, in the era of deindustrialization. How do all those forces shape the norms of who are you intimate with and who can you show emotions with? How are those forces shaping the tendency within hip hop to center emotional bonds between men and separate that from sexual romantic bonds that might be heterosexual? I love this picture. These are two guys, brothers from the band Ray Shrummer, I can't pronounce it. But again, this sort of closeness between the men where one is lying on the shoulder of the other, one has this hair carefully across his face. It's a very vulnerable, feminized, inviting image of two men that we don't associate with the hypermasculinity in hip hop. What I'm suggesting is this kind of openness and vulnerability is present in hip hop if we would only look. What I'm arguing for in particular is the cultural and social stressors in the 80s and 90s led to a structural feeling of hip hop, which I'm calling the homosocialization of intimacy. It's a privileging of the kind of closeness between men that we saw in the image of Wayne and Baby kissing, that we see in the two men of Ray Shrummer leaning against each other. It's a privileging of men as the ideal source of men's sociality and closeness, separable from homosexuality, even separable from homoeroticism. But queer theory does not give us a lot of space to think about how closeness, intimacy can be separable from sexual desire. But I would say during the 80s and 90s, hip hop evolved to make space for homosocialization of intimacy, the rise of passionate friendships, what may or may not relate at all to the decline of fear of being seen as gay. If my closeness to my male friends does not have me categorized as gay, then homohysteria does not come into it. But because queer theory has us only thinking about the queer, straight binary, we can't think of other ways that intimacy is produced. Hip hop produces what I call illegible intimacies, ways of people being close to each other that frustrate categories of the dominant culture and within Black culture. And in this case, I'm thinking about platonic couples, these kind of bonds between men that rival the kind of romantic relationships men might have with women, these illegible intimacies that lead to seeing men as the appropriate source of care and support while marginalizing bonds and care for women. So hip hop has produced space for these illegible intimacies. Here I'm riffing off of Mark Anthony Neal's idea of illegible masculinities, the kind of masculinities within Black popular culture that frustrate dominant culture and Black culture. here I'm thinking about illegible intimacies as non-normative queer bonds, but not queer in the sense that it's a sign of sexual desire. Queer as in non-normative, frustrating both gay and straight norms, illegible intimacies. So platonic couples. The thing that I want us to notice is how Wayne and Baby do not run from the notion that that kiss was real, that their closeness was true, that it was okay for men to be that close, such that kissing each other on the lips was okay. So after the picture of Wayne and Baby kissing was circulated on the internet, Wayne and Baby responded in public, in interviews, to the how people push back against the kiss. But contrary to what we might expect, given hip hop's notoriety for being homophobic, they did not say that that kiss was not them. They did not disavow the kiss. Instead, they said that this is a kind of legitimate source of intimacy. This is a legitimate expression of closeness. So Wayne to me is my son, my firstborn son. That's my life, that's my love, and that's my thing. That's my little son. I love him to death. So what's important here is that Baby unofficially adopted Lil Wayne when he was 12, after Lil Wayne's stepfather was murdered. And so to Lil Wayne and Baby's mind, they have a father-son relationship. But as you notice from the gossip social medias that I talked about at the beginning of the conversation, what fans saw their relationship as, who saw them as not gay, they said that they had a friend relationship. They were just that close. They weren't father and son, they were best friends. And there's this discourse in hip hop, this thug life, thug love discourse that makes it possible for men, even kissing on the lips, holding each other, to be legitimate within masculinity, not threatening your sexual orientation. So the thug life, thug love discourse says that Black men have had to hustle on the streets to survive. They had to be involved in the legal economy in order to survive. And that's the thug life. And that leads to this sort of openness and tenderness and willing to take care of each other within hip hop culture that is unrivaled in other places. I can have this openly tender relationship with other men. I can have this thug love because I've lived this thug life. There's a way within hip hop culture to square open tenderness between men and an encouragement, in fact, of an intimacy between men that isn't about sexual orientation, which is about emotional attachment. And so people who try to recuperate Lil Wayne and Baby as straight figures, they said that they had this kind of thug life, thug love dynamic. To Lil Wayne and Baby, they are father and son. Within hip hop culture, they can be understood as having a thug life, thug love dynamic. So they're not disavowing the closeness, they are embracing the closeness. We are close, we did kiss each other, and that's fine. And so there's a discourse that's available within hip hop that makes it legitimate for men to have this kind of emotional attachment. So Lil Wayne, shortly after that picture was circulated, created a song. And here are some of the lyrics from the song. Damn right, I kissed my daddy. I think they pissed at how rich my daddy is. And I'm his kid, I stunt with my daddy. So Lil Wayne is telling this thug life story of, who was with me when I didn't have anything, just my daddy being Baby or Birdman, who was there when I needed money. There is an account of this sort of interdependency between Lil Wayne and Baby as caused by the social circumstances that made them very close with each other. So Lil Wayne, again, not running away from the idea that they kissed each other. Damn right, I kissed my daddy. But that's within this legitimate ways of being masculine. I can do that because he took care of me when no one else would. And I was hustling on the streets. I didn't have any money, and he took care of me. And that was a way to reconcile this kind of emotional attachment with claims to legitimate masculinity. But we can imagine that Lil Wayne and Baby would say that they had a sort of intimacy that was legitimate, that they were straight. But why do fans see it that way? And what I'm suggesting is that hip hop culture socializes its fans into a script, into a way of seeing, a structure of feeling that says that homosocialization of intimacy, men should look to closeness for other men rather than putting their emotional attachments in the realm of romantic relationships with women. And so here's another comment from the gossip blog that we studied, where a fan is also making sense of their closeness in similar ways. What I think is striking about this commentary is that the commentator is calling out homophobia in the Black communities. And really, you can extend that to say, not just homophobia within Black communities, the lack of discourse about intimacy that isn't reduced to gay versus straight. How else can we account for men kissing each other on the lips that isn't worrying about gay versus straight? But even still, the commenter reproduces homophobia, laminating a picture of them laid up in the bed with Weezy's ass in the air. This is not a backing away from homophobia necessarily. It's a more ambivalent relationship to homophobia, but it's creating a space for intimacies where our sexual orientation is separable from emotional attachment. Just look at the picture for what it is. Two men showing unconventional love, a redefinition of what intimacy can entail that isn't just reading closeness between men as a sign of sexual desire, sexual orientation.
And Dr. Randolph, I'm just going to step in. I had sent a time warning like we talked about, so you probably got like 5 minutes or 2 minutes left to wrap up.
Yeah, that's great because I'm right at where
okay,
I want
awesome.
to.
Awesome.
So some of the ideas that I want to leave you all with is this idea that historical errors can shape the type of intimate relations. Instead of only being interested in the gay versus straight binary, we can ask, in what type of errors is the homosocialization of intimacy produced? When are passionate friendships more likely to happen? What are the social conditions that make those likely to happen? When are passionate friendships sign of sexual orientation? And so people who have studied passionate friendships have tended to see those as precursors to homosexual identification. So people have said that Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed had a passionate friendship and read that as sign that Abraham Lincoln was probably gay or bisexual because he had this close friend who he shared a bed with and wrote passionate letters towards. There's a way that queer theorists have recuperated signs of closeness between two people of the same sex as indications of sexual orientation. But what if that's not necessarily true? What if passionate friendships is not an identity in search of another identity, it's its own kind of formation of intimacy? What are the conditions under which passionate friendships, the homosocialization of intimacy, are more dominant, and when can those kind of relationships be separable from sexual desire and sexual identity? And another thing that this research raises is queer sociality without queer identities. Lil Wayne and Baby, they do not identify as gay. They don't identify as queer, but their way of relating to each other is against the norms of homosexuality and heterosexuality. So there can be a queer sociality, a queer way of relating that doesn't require the people involved in it to identify as same-sex oriented at all. And I think by studying experiences, centering the experience of Black people and other people of color, we get at these queer socialities that aren't defined by a queer identity. Jeffrey McCune's work gets at that really eloquently, thinking about men on the down low and the way that queer theory has tried to reduce men on the down low as people who are self-hating Black gay men. What if down low is its own identity? You can have a queer sociality without a queer identity. And also, I think this work points to a need for more studies of the Black private sphere, the emotional lives of Black folks as something that's understudied but needs more attention.